right, so we are recording. Look like we have 3 people on attending, and we will be starting momentarily. So welcome to the webinar. Feel free to type in the chat, introduce yourself. Feel free if you have any questions, looking for answers, you can type them in the Q&A section. Look like I did start the chat with an initial welcome. So feel free to type in there and we will be starting momentarily. All right, can you hear me, Sister Lim?
I can hear you.
Wonderful, wonderful. And you are able to control my screen?
I'm not sure yet. It doesn't appear that I'm able to move any of the slides.
Okay.
Let's try this.
Okay. I see the mouse moving.
See it moving, but it's not changing the slide, so you may still have to do that.
No, it actually did change it. Can you see the change?
I see it now.
You want to go back to the first one?
Yes.
Okay, so you have control. I'm excited. Welcome, family, friends, brothers and sisters, everybody in the wide world to our culturally relevant curriculum webinar series. And if I may say so myself, you are in for an absolute treat tonight. We have Lynn Morton here with us from the Women of God's Ministry Design, who is an absolute professional in restorative justice, particularly with culturally relevant practices within restorative justice. Last year, she worked with us, blessed us with a webinar, which was a part 1, and it was so amazing. I learned so much. I took so much back to my school district. It was necessary, and we had a part 2. So without any further ado, I'm going to let her take control. And you have it. Thank you so much for doing this with us, Sister Lynn. And you have control. I'm going to put myself on mute.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. And once again, thank you so much to my brother Hashem and Racial Justice Now for allowing me to share just a little bit about me to get us started. As Hashem said, I am the executive director of the Woman of God's Design Ministry in Chicago, and also CEO of Lynn Morton Enterprises, which is what is the business that actually houses my training practices and life coaching practices. I am a certified life coach and trainer, and what I like to call a motivational teacher. And I got into this particular area of work because of what I needed for my family. I had my nephews in my home, and they were troubled. Schools were not helping me. So I had to find something to help my children. And as God would have it, I actually found something that helped my family, but then began to help the entire city of Chicago. So that's just a little bit about me, but I want to move us into why you all came to the webinar. And it's about restorative justice. Restorative justice in and of itself, okay, Hashem, the slides aren't moving. I love technology when it works. It works so well.
Yeah, it says you have control of the screen.
It's not allowing me to move the slide though.
Go ahead. I turned it. You just say next slide.
Okay. Restorative justice. What is it? Restorative justice is a philosophy. It's a set of practices and a mindset that addresses injustice, thinking about harms, needs, obligations of all those involved. It is a belief that those affected by harm can work together to repair the harm, and that a collective effort leads to true accountability. Its practices are also a vehicle to create and promote relationship building. Restorative justice in and of itself is not a program. I want to make that perfectly clear. Restorative justice is not a program. It is a philosophy. There are practices to go along with that, and it is a lifestyle. Restorative justice is not a one-time event. It is a lifestyle in how we live. Okay, next. So when we talk about restorative justice, I want us to think about in the realm of culturally relevant curriculum. I feel right now at this point in my life, and as I'm going into probably like the 13th year of actually being a restorative justice practitioner, really bringing to the forefront the practices and the historical context of restorative justice. We have different ways of being in restorative justice in the world, just like anything else. But it is very important to me in my practice that we talk about it from our historical standpoint of being people of African descent. So tonight is the first night that I'm really sharing publicly how I have begun to define restorative justice and calling it culturally centered restorative justice. The practice of circles is being part of that. We all know that that is an indigenous practices that people generally talk about from the indigenous people, the First Nations people here in North America. And yes, they did practice circles, but on the continent of Africa, where my forefathers are from, we practice restorative justice as well. And I feel that it is very important for our children to understand that as well. So this is how I define it. Culturally centered restorative justice is a process and a coordinating lifestyle that honors African principles, values, and traditions. It is self-conscious centering of Ubuntu. Those who practice culturally centered restorative justice are open and available to others, affirming of others, have a proper self-assurance, and understands the interconnectedness of all humanity. Culturally centered restorative justice is used to build deep relationships and community, resolve personal and social problems, and to promote optimal functioning among all those involved. When we are talking about a culturally centered restorative justice, a culturally centered restorative practice, we have to first understand and be aware and be self-assured and centered in that I am because of you and you are because of me. We are all interconnected, and that's where we are. And that begins the transition for our young people and when we're using restorative practices within school systems. We have to build that community first. If we are not in this to build community, then we have a distorted view. Okay, next. So here in Chicago, we do a lot of work. A lot of work has gone into having restorative justice in schools. And there was a group of us years ago that came together to talk about what we want restorative justice to do in schools and what we want it to look like. So RJ is a set of practices and values that holistically prevents and repairs harm, builds community and relationships, resulting in a positive and supportive school climate. Goals in schools: create a culture of caring, use RJ as an alternative to suspensions, expulsions, and arrests, increase social, emotional, and academic capacity through the communication in the circle, get to understand the root causes of behavior of students who are acting out. So I have there a note to myself to share the story about Jamal, which is a student that came into the practice because he was always in trouble and had been labeled bad and just always something when he came to school. But as he began to come to circle and we gained his trust, he began to share why he was always acting out, if you will, in school. And the reason why he always wanted to come to school and play and not pay attention was because when he was at home, he didn't get the opportunity to play because he, in fact, at 10 years old, had to take care of younger siblings. In the morning, he got them breakfast. After school, he took care of them. He had to take care of his younger sisters. He would help get them ready in the morning. So when he came to school, he wanted to be a kid and he wanted to play. And he knew that wasn't the time, but that was the only time that he got to play because of things going on in his home. He had situations in his home where he really was the man of the house at 10 years old. So through the practices of restorative justice and sitting in a circle and actually building that trust, that's how we got to the root of the issue. Suspensions don't do that. Suspensions just punish without ever having any learning or teaching. So restorative justice in school also strengthens the sense of belonging. When you build a community and not just have students coming into your building because it's school, but have them be a part of building the relationships. What is it that we want to accomplish? Where are we? How are we going to do this? It gives them a sense of belonging. Okay, next. So we also, with restorative justice in school, we wanted to break the cycle of retribution and violence. We wanted to empower students and hold them accountable. Increase safety at the school and in the surrounding community. Increase social capital by building relationships and community. And human capital by having the ability to communicate and address life's challenges. When we started in restorative justice, most people wanted us, and will still do. Most people, if you go into a place and they want me to train people on restorative justice or bring programming that use restorative principles into their building, the first thing they want to say is, we want to do this for the kids. We want to do this for the kids. But you can't do anything for the kids if you're not doing something for yourself as the adults. The adults have to allow the processes and the philosophy and the practices to change them first, to change their way of communication in order to address these life challenges. I have schools now where there are teachers who want me to just come and hold circle with them, period, so that they have a place to release and talk about what's going on with them. Okay. So we also now have moved into a bigger place with restorative justice and community. We call them community-based RJ hubs. They are exactly a one-stop shop for all of the restorative practices in community. We started in schools, but we needed it to bud out into the community so that our residents and our community residents would get to experience circles. And with the RJ Hub, the 5 pillars of the RJ Hub in supporting young people is radical hospitality, providing a welcoming and a hospitable place. If you're saying you're having restorative justice or restorative practices, even in schools, if nobody wants to participate, it is something wrong with your practice. It's something wrong with it. And accompaniment. That means we don't just send young people to get help. We actually have people to walk with them, to walk the process out, to walk them to wherever it is that they need to be. And the third thing is building relationship with the youth and the family is critical. We have to have those relationships in place so that we get to see what's going on. In order to help the youth, we help the family. And relentless engagement of systems and stakeholders. You cannot be successful if all of the stakeholders are not involved. That's one of the mistakes that happen when people start to try to build restorative justice or say they're having restorative justice is that they leave out a component, and most of the time that component that schools especially try to leave out is of the parent and the community. They try to keep it all within the confines of the school. And as an RJ Hub, we want it to be a learning community, collaboration and learning with other RJ Hubs, which means that through the RJ Hub connection, we are now connected across the city, so that, and connected in a way that we were not before. Chicago is a very divided, separated place, and to have connections with people who are in this fight makes it so much easier, because you don't feel like you're out there alone. Okay, so we're going to get to pillars of restorative justice. And if someone has a question, there is a chat box that you can get into so that we can see if you have any questions. And I want to make sure that I answer as many questions as I can tonight, if you have them. So the pillars of restorative justice, harms and needs. And I've also paired these with some African principles, because one of the problems that we are having is that we as a people stop telling the story. We have not shared effectively with the younger generations our struggle as a people. We have not shared, many of them do not know the struggles that our people had pre-civil rights. You know, we don't have adequate African-American history, Black history, period, if some of our students are even lucky enough to have it. So having them understand some of the principles from which we come, and these are already embedded in restorative practices. They are the unspoken principles of restorative justice. So Umoja, which is unity, strive for and maintain unity in the family, community, and nation and race, maintaining healing, repairing broken relationships. Broken relationships is a basis of restorative justice. When we come into restorative justice, we're talking about, it's not just offense against a person, it's an offense and an infraction of a relationship. So how do we maintain unity? How do we bring unity back to a broken space? And most times infractions happen because of an unmet need. Whether it's expressed or not, it's something that somebody needed or wanted that broke that relationship. Even when we have the worst of crimes, there is something that happened with the person that caused that offense, that caused them to do what they did. And we as a people practice Umoja, unity. I had the opportunity this week to sit with a sister from Ghana, and she talked about how they don't use a formal litigation or court system. Everything has happened within the family, the unit, or the tribal chiefs handle any disputes. It is a rare occasion that something goes to litigation. And that's our people. And that's what we did, and that's how we are. So that's why we are absolutely moving in this direction as far as my practice and how I train people. So the next one is obligations. When we come into a restorative practice, as I said, it's about relationships and moving into those relationships and repairing. So there are obligations. You can click the next slide. And with the obligations, there is Ujima, collective work and responsibility. To build and maintain community together and make our brothers and sisters' problems our problems, and we solve them together. We have that understanding that if my sister or my brother is hurting, if my sister or my brother has a need, then I have a need, then I am hurting. We are obligated to fix what's ever wrong and to do it collectively, to do it together. Okay, next. The next thing is engagement. Nia, purpose. To make our collective vocation the building and developing of our community in order to restore our people to their traditional greatness. This is our purpose. Our purpose is engagement. When we come into a restorative place and a restorative mindset and a restorative practice, we're coming to make it a building place and developing of our community and our people. Any person that comes into contact in a restorative situation, they should leave that situation better than when they came. And that happens because of engagement. There has to be engagement. So those are the pillars of restorative justice. Also, Imani, faith. You have to come in, when you come in engaging, to believe with all of our heart in our people, our parents, our teachers, our leaders, and the righteousness and victory of our struggle. We got to have faith that we can do this collectively. We can do this together. That, you know, my mom used to say all the time, what happened in my house stays in my house. And we have to take that globally. What happens in our community stays in our community. We as the community can handle anything that happens in our community. I have no doubts about it, because that's what we used to do. We just need to get back to what we know was right. Okay. So we're going to go over quickly some myths that prevent restorative discipline. We're talking about culturally relevant schools. We're talking about culturally centered restorative justice. So what are some myths that happen to that? So the first myth, number one, right out the gate. Black students misbehave more than their white peers. One of our sister friends here, her name is Kathy Bankhead. She says it like this: Black kids aren't that bad and white kids aren't that good. Our children are getting in trouble and getting harsher discipline simply because they're Black. White kids do the same thing. White kids get counseling. Our kids get suspended. Our kids get expelled. Our kids get arrested. So one of the things I'm going to give you tonight that you can go back and look at, because I'm going to move through quick, I'm going to give you some reports and data that back up what I'm saying. I used to hate data because everybody would say, Lynn, where's your data? Where's your data? What are you doing? What are you doing? And the stories are the data to me. But there are now other means of data, and I love data so that when I say what I say, I can pull up the data and prove people wrong. So there's a report called Opportunity Suspended: The Desperate Impact of Disciplinary Expulsion from School. This research says that student behavior based on race, they have found no evidence that the overrepresentation of Blacks is out of school suspension is due to higher rates of misbehavior. The Council of State Governments and Public Policy Research Institute has a report called Breaking Schools Rules, a statewide study of how discipline rates to student success and juvenile justice involvement. The finding in this analysis of Texas's student population, the African American students were no more likely than students of other races to commit serious offenses that mandate that a student be removed from the campus. Our kids aren't doing anything different than their white peers. They're not misbehaving more. They're not maliciously doing things more than white students. Okay. Myth number 2. School exclusions teaches moral values and promotes accountability for misbehavior. Okay. So, exclusionary discipline does not instruct students on responsibility or promote an understanding of appropriate behavior. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention found that students removed from school are more likely to be retained, dropped out of school, i.e. pushed out, become teen parents, and engage in delinquent behavior. School exclusion does not teach morals, values, and promotes accountability for misbehavior. It does not. Because number 1, discipline is a learning. Discipline is teaching. Discipline is taking responsibility, not punishment. And when we have out of school suspension and those types of things without any type of re-entry circle, things of that nature, there is no learning that's taking place. And 9 times out of 10, I'm almost willing to say that students who are suspended, because I've seen it over and over, students who are suspended come back to school and do the same thing. Why? Because they have not learned anything, and now I'm angry. So now I'm really going to get on your nerves because you sent me home. And you didn't try to see what was wrong with me. There was no concern there. I have a lot of teachers who I encounter and move around with, and they say the same thing. Kids who are suspended come back and do the same exact thing that they got suspended for. So school exclusion doesn't teach anything. So number 3, myth number 3. Myth number 3. Less out of school suspension means more disruptive students in class. So out of school suspension really is a way to try to help teachers get a peaceful environment in their classroom. Keeping troubled students out of the class to resolve the issue instead of sending them home will doom other students in ongoing disruptive incidents. The truth is, with restorative methods in place, you're actually going to get a better outcome than if you had the student out of class. One principal at Leaders High School in New York City said, since implementing restorative practices rather than sending students home, they've seen a nearly 70% decrease in disputes and incidents and 0 suspensions in one school year. It's because they're embracing restorative practices. Restorative practices actually helps teachers. It actually helps them with classroom management because they're building relationships with the students on a deeper level, which leads me to myth number 4. Restorative justice disempowers teachers. Restorative practices actually empowers teachers because now you're building community in your class. Now you have moved from a place of doing something to doing something with. You are building your community within your classroom because from the very beginning, you're asking your students when they come in, how are we going to be together? And the more you use restorative practices like morning check-in circles, check-out circles at the end of the day, midweek circles, once you begin to do this effectively and consistently, students are going to share. And if you use morning circles, you will absolutely get to know the pop-off factor, what I call the pop-off. You will know who's going to pop off by 10 a.m. Because if you do a check-in circle in the morning, the students are going to tell you, I didn't get up right. I didn't have a great night last night. This happened in my neighborhood, and this happened. So you're going to already know that the possibility for Johnny to have a bad morning is great. But you can head that off because you already know it's coming, and you won't be blindsided because you're empowered to handle what's going on in your classroom. Okay? Myth number 5. Restorative justice policies allow students to blame their problems on others. So not true. One of the things that you will understand about being in a restorative practice, a restorative atmosphere, is that you come to this place with the understanding that we're going to talk about something that I did. We're going to talk about, and it's a voluntary situation if you're coming to circle or you come into a family group conference. You're actually going to say, okay, I'm putting my stuff out here on front. And I don't know anything that is more accountable, system of accountability, than you having to say, okay, I'm getting ready to share and talk about my stuff. That's a very hard place. And restorative practices do not allow for people to blame other people. When you're in circle, before you come to circle, you have to go through the whole process of saying, am I ready for this? Am I ready to admit my place in the harm, whatever it is, whatever degree I had in it? Am I ready to admit that? So no, you can't blame others. This is all about you as an individual. Number 6, restorative justice takes responsibility away from parents and puts it all on the teacher. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. A misconception around out of school suspension is that parents will instill their own form of discipline while the student is at home and thereby participate with the teachers in correcting the unwelcoming behavior. However, that does not necessarily happen in our society, because if a student is suspended, he may come from a home where his parents are working. There may be just one parent in the home, and that parent is working. That parent may have other things that go on. So it is very likely that a lot of our kids are just sitting at home and they're still not learning or punishment, if you will, happening. But what actually happens, properly implemented restorative justice programs actively seek the support of faculty, administration, and parents. And one of the strong suits of restorative justice and restorative practices is that it is absolutely necessary to have parental involvement. You cannot have a successful restorative practice if at some level you don't engage parents and community. You have not had a restorative practice without them. It doesn't work like that. Myth number 7. If a student misbehaves, he or she deserves to be yelled at. Research shows that young people's behavior can only improve once a safe and satisfying relationship is established with the educator. Yelling clouds the messages as students keep hearing over and over and are being overwhelmed by their emotions. Let's think about it. Do we as adults like for someone to talk to us in a manner that is not conducive to equal respect? We don't like it. So for us to do it to children is kind of hypocritical, if you will. We have a lot of teachers and administrators that I often tell, you've forgotten what it was like to be 12, 13, 14, 16. You did the same stupid stuff. We all did. We all did stupid stuff at that age. And we lived and we learned. So we have to give our babies the same opportunity. And our last myth that we're going to talk about tonight is myth number 8. Punishment holds students accountable. Punishment does not hold them accountable. Punishment only works when the authority is watching and relies on external control. Restorative methods impose a consequence rather than a punishment to help create empathy and active involvement. A consequence dramatically improves the chances that positive attitudes and behaviors will be internalized, and the young people will behave well, not merely out of fear, but because they want to feel good about themselves and have a positive connection with others. Punishment is just that, punishment. There is no teaching, but accountability is something very different. So does anybody have any questions? Are there any questions in the chat box before I move on to what's necessary for successful practices? Do we have any questions? I'll give you a minute in case you want to type something in. Okay, we don't have any. We'll move on to successful restorative practices. When I go through these practices, I also have Adinkra symbols attached to them. The Adinkra symbols of the Ashanti people of Ghana. And I brought these elements into my practice because these thoughts and these practices and symbols, I should say, in the practice. So I want to move us into this really quickly because time is winding up for us. So the first thing you need to have a successful practice is respect. To consider worthy of high regard or the process of the people involved. And this symbol is no one should bite the other, the symbol of peace and harmony. So when we come into a restorative process or practice, there has to be, the groundwork has to be laid for respect for the process. One of the worst things you can do is to bring someone in that does not believe in the process, that's not ready for the process, and doesn't respect it. They think it's just something that we just gonna do just for me to get off of punishment or not to be suspended. But there has to be an establishment of respect. And it is the key ingredient that holds all restorative practices together. Every person is expected to show respect for others and themselves during the process, because the process requires deep listening. When you come into the process, you're coming in to listen, to understand, not listening to respond. Restorative practices causes us to slow down and to listen, to give voice to what we feel deeply. So there has to be respect in the process. That's the number one thing. So next. Relationships, developing caring connections, and finding common ground. This symbol of unity and relations. It's a reminder to contribute to the community that it is unity in strength. When you come into this, we understand, according to restorative justice and its philosophy, is that anything wrong happens is an infraction against a relationship. The community feels violated. It's damaging to the relationship so that people are now out of sync. We were once walking together. Now we are out of sync. So when relationships are strong, people experience more fulfilling lives, and communities become places where we want to live. And we have to be willing to mend the relationships. As I was talking to my sister Tuesday from Ghana, and she was expressing to me how the tribal chiefs and the elders of the community bring people back into the community. If by chance something happens where the crime happened, where someone had to be litigated and they had to go to jail, once they serve their time, the village welcomes them back into their place of where they were. We also had the opportunity this week to hear from a brother from Rwanda who is actually facilitating these conversations with the people who lost people during the genocide. Some of the people that they are reconciling with and rebuilding relationships with are the actual people during the genocide who were the murderers, who were the people who killed other people's family member, but they are in the process of reconciling, bringing our people back together. It is not our way and not our practice to just throw people away. We come into relationship and we build relationship. Whatever happens, we rebuild the relationships because things will happen, but we just don't throw people away. We stay in relationship until we come into that. So the next. When we come into this restorative practice, the next thing is responsibility, being accountable for our actions. The ram's horn is a symbol of humility together with strength. It takes humility to come in to say that I'm going to be here and I'm going to be strengthened by what's going on in my life, and I'm going to be strong enough to say, okay, let's fix it. I did something wrong. That's humility together with strength to be responsible for what I've done at whatever level I was part of it. And for the person who was harmed, it takes humility to bring forgiveness or to say, I want to start on the process of forgiveness, because forgiveness is not a one-time occurrence. Forgiveness is a process. But we take responsibility for our forgiving or releasing someone else. Okay. Restoration. Restoration, repairing the harm that has been caused. If you are coming into a restorative process, it's about restoration. It's about bringing back into right relationship. The process isn't over until the question has been asked, what can I do to repair the harm? What can I do to bring the relationship back right? Repairing the harm that has been caused. This is the symbol of reconciliation and peacemaking. We are peacemakers. And we come into this process ready to restore. Even in schools, when little Johnny disrupts the class, little Johnny needs to be in a place where he needs to be restored and brought back into right relationship, and understands that his actions are not just about him, it's about the whole class. and teaching our people those lessons that we are not just one-sided. It is not just one-sided. What we do affects the whole, because I am because you are. And so lastly, reintegration. And this, over the years, I have found to be the hardest thing about the whole process. We understand that from beginning, we want to take responsibility, we want to have respect, we want to be engaging, but reintegration is hard because if you're working in a place where not everyone is engaged, not everyone has bought into the practice of restorative justice, not everyone wants to see success happens, reintegration is really hard. We have peace centers, or peace rooms as they're now being called, in Chicago. And if we bring some students into the peace room and the students within themselves have found reconciliation, the reintegration piece, because once they come out of the peace room, some of them go back into a hostile environment. They're going back into the environment that triggered them to do some of the things that they've done before. So if Ms. Jones is the teacher, but Ms. Jones does not believe in restorative justice, when she kicked Johnny out the room, Johnny came downstairs, had his opportunity to talk about what's going on. He's ready to make amends, but as soon as he gets in the door, Ms. Jones started yelling at him again, which is a trigger that's going to cause him to backslide again into some of those repeated behaviors. Because the peace room is a safe space. It's a restorative space. But maybe Ms. Jones isn't there yet, or maybe society isn't ready to bring them back and to reintegrate them back into society. So this is one of the hardest pieces of restorative justice, in my opinion, and what I've experienced is reintegration. So in our time together, and what I was asked to do was talk about some of the myths, what are the processes, and what is necessary to be successful. So I've given you that, but I also want to leave enough time for you to ask me questions. There was a question that came in about teachers being asked to, wait, let me get it because it's the question correctly. Teachers having to take sensitivity training, something to that effect. And to my knowledge, there isn't anything legally that is required of teachers to do that. I know here in Chicago, Chicago Public Schools did some anti-bias training, some training around, what's the word I'm looking for? It'll come to me in a minute, okay? But nothing in federal guidelines or anything like that that I know of that makes them, hold them accountable to do that type of training. So Hashem, do we have any other questions come in?
So I don't have any questions at this time. I think that the question from a Ms. Porter said, in some sort of cultural competency, is some sort of cultural competency training required for teachers? Is there an idea of how to mandate this if it's not already set in stone? If cultural competency training is already mandated federally, how can we track which schools have and have not received this training? This is for more than one question. Are there certain states or school districts that have mandated for training? Of course, police departments across the nations are beginning to make this training mandatory, and schools should be too.
Okay, so yeah, that was the question I was looking for. I do not know of any federal mandate right now that says teachers need to do that. As I stated in Chicago, they had a little workshop around anti-bias. Implicit and explicit racism and things of that nature. And if that is something, I would believe and think that that would be part of an overall organizing campaign, is that teachers need to have this for wherever her location is. So Lisa Marie White, I see her question. She says, how can parents support schools on doing this work, or rather implementing this work? Excellent questions. One of the things that we started off doing and having parents do, and what I will say to parents, is find out as much about restorative practices as you can first. Because schools will try to run game. I'm sorry, but they do. They will try to run game. So how do parents help? Number one, parents become informed and say, this is what we need. I believe this is what we need for our children. Number two, if your school is a school district that has local school councils, which are made up of parents, if your school has Title I funding, there should be some type of parent committee already formed. You have PTAs, and these then become the places where parents begin to talk about implementation. Now, I have a RJ Get Started guide with the whole implementation plan in it. Parents need to become part of what I call the implementation team, or the RJ team, so that parents are involved with the decision making. Are we going to host circles? What are we going to host circles around? It is my recommendation that parents are trained as circle keepers, so that when situations happen in the school, not only is the staff equipped to handle it, but you have parents who come in that also help. It makes a difference when students see that people from their community are concerned. And I learned that with my first Peace Center. When parents learned, and not only the students learned, that I lived right down the street from them, that I was not somebody that came in with a program from some other neighborhood or somewhere across town, that I was right there with them. It gave them a better understanding that, yeah, I know what you went through last night because I seen it. So one of the things that parents need to start doing is start building your team or your cadre of parents and bringing and requesting restorative practices in your school. Start at your parent meetings. Bring up restorative practices. Restorative practices is a big buzzword now, but to be also monitors of it being implemented correctly.
And you can also refer your principals, your school districts, your school board to this webinar that will be up on our YouTube page likely tomorrow. You can also take down Sister Lynn's contact information and refer them to her directly as well. So those are also ways to support restorative practices in your school, particularly culturally relevant restorative practices.
Absolutely.
So if there aren't any more questions, as I wrap this up, these last final words, We are so thankful for those that tuned in. We are thankful for Sister Lynn for blessing us with a part 2. Again, we should have this up on the web tomorrow for the world to view. This was very enlightening. I certainly appreciate the Adinkaras, the culturally relevant, historical, symbolic traditions incorporated into the work. Those things are not simple or just lightly added. They have some significant deep meanings that we won't go into right now, but it's a powerful, powerful body of work. This has truly been a blessing, and I am grateful to have been a part of it. So thank you again, Sister Lynn. If there aren't any more questions, we're going to close this out. I may change the bar with Racial Justice Now. We're at rjnohio.org. We're on Facebook. We're on Instagram. We're on Twitter. And we can be in a neighborhood near you with a short email or a phone call. So thank you all for your time. Wishing you all peace and blessings. Thank you all so much. Appreciate you, Sister Lynn, and we will be in touch soon and very soon.
Thank you so much.